talking about, and this will probably, I think what I did last week is I went all the way up to the beginning of page 1 of the residential purchase agreement. Is that right? Does anybody remember nobody was here last week. So what we're going to do is this is a copy of the form, agency disclosure. Is this going to work? It doesn't look like some of the things that I've written on it show up. So it's just the way life is sometimes. All right, so I'm just using this as a sample. Amazing how that is. Highlight. It shows up here. After all that work. All right, so I can hear, but I can't see. All right, how about this? How about that? Looks good. So this is a sample of the purchase contract. My scan copy didn't seem to include all of the yellow highlighting and other red marks and things like that, but the handout has it. So I don't know what to say other than I might need to rescan it and this time check color, which I don't have time to do right now. But most of it is here. So first of all, date prepared. We're going to go through how to fill out the residential purchase agreement. I'm going to do a little bit about what does it mean and what would you say. Let me just see. All right, cool. So offered, date prepared, up in the upper left-hand corner, the date prepared. Let me see, is this? It's not doing it because it just isn't going to. I know. The highlighter doesn't work unless I spend some time doing something else. Cool. So date prepared is the date that you're actually preparing the contract. It's not necessarily the date that the contract is going to be signed. So if I'm doing the contract right now and preparing the contract, but I know the buyer's not going to sign it till tomorrow, I would still put in today's date as the date prepared. That's not the same thing as the contract date. Then it says this is an offer from. Notice it says you may not be able to add names, need seller agreement, all names if on loan or on property. That's sort of an ambiguous thing. I've had several occasions. Do you have a question?
Yeah, so which data we use as refer to it as the purchase?
The question is, what date do we use? What it's going to say is on all the future documents, contract dated. So if you have an addendum or a counteroffer, it's going to say contract dated, that's the date.
Oh.
That's the date prepared. So what it means here, this is an offer from, sometimes the form will only allow you really to put in 2 names. Is it possible that you might have 2 people, more than 2 people buying a property?
Yes.
Yeah, there's a additional signatures addendum that you need to use. This gets really complicated because the additional signatures addendum is really designed for the purchase agreement and it becomes more difficult on other documents. But I recently had a transaction that had 4 people signing it and you can only put 2 there. The other thing that you need to know that if they're on the loan, they probably need to be on the contract, and if they're on the contract, they probably need to be on the loan. Does everybody understand that? So people will come to me and they will say, you know, I've got so-and-so and you understand, if they're on the loan, they need to be on the contract. If they're on the contract, they need to be on the loan. And if you hear, if they are saying things, well, my father is actually going to be the one lending us the money, well, then they need to be on the contract too. Oh, maybe she doesn't know she can come in. All right, so the property to be acquired is street address, city, and zip code. City, county, state, you fill all that in. The assessor's parcel number you get from the multiple listing service. And you can put that actually in the form if you use, how many of you saw me talk about MLS Connect? That's many of you, wow, that's great. If you use MLS Connect, which I was rambling about last time, it'll automatically import all that information, right, including the assessor's parcel number, and it just saves you a lot of time. Escrow shall occur on, you either can write in a date or put in so many days after acceptance. Now, there's an issue sometimes with so many days after acceptance. And by the way, one of the things I did, those of you that are online may not be able to see it that clearly, because I highlighted all the places in the purchase contract where it said shall. This, by the way, if you want to have a fun thing with purchase contracts, take out your copy and find all the places where it says shall. Right, and so this says close of escrow shall occur. That means that's when you're supposed to do it. And you can either put in a date if you click there. If you click in where right in that spot where it says date, it will automatically pull up a calendar. You can pick a date, or you can put in 30 days, 21 days, 40 days. The problem with putting so many days after is that that day may be a weekend. And it may be a Monday, and if it's a Monday, there's a problem because it has to fund on Friday to close on Monday. And they probably don't want it to fund on Friday because then they have to pay interest over the weekend, but they don't get the property. So I found that it is better to pick a date. I prefer personally Tuesdays and Wednesdays. The reason for that is that if it doesn't close on Tuesday, it could close on Wednesday. If it doesn't close on Wednesday, it could close on Thursday. If it doesn't close on Thursday, it might close on Friday, and we still close that week. If you pick Friday as the date of closing and anything goes wrong, you're back to Monday again, right? And if you say 30 days from acceptance, do we know the day that acceptance is going to occur? Do we know that? No, we don't know that. So we don't know what day that is. And if you don't like the date that falls on, you have to do an addendum in order to change the close of escrow date. And I was very lazy, time efficient. And I didn't like to make addendums if I didn't have to, right? You understand? It becomes tiresome. So I like to pick a date. Buyer and seller, as we're going through this, the next line says under E, I'm on 1E, buyer and seller are referred to as the party. Brokers are not parties to this agreement. This is a surprise to many real estate agents. All right, real estate agents sometimes will call the escrow company and change close of escrow date. They don't have the power to do that. Agency A disclosure. Now I've marked in here some PRDS. Actually, I didn't do this. I stole it from another office. But I helped somebody write a PRDS offer. This isn't the first time. And so I may do a class at some point on how to do a PRDS, but I've just sort of marked some of the different things where it's different. So the box that says disclosure regarding agency relationships is automatically checked because it's part of the agreement. Confirmation, notice I typed in company name. Company is the agent. You understand, you're not the agent. The company is the agent. So if it's our listing, KW Silicon City, KW Santa Rosa, KW San Carlos, that's the agent. Later, there's a place for you to put your name. And then also it says, I believe it's the same thing here. If you were the selling agent, you would put in the company name. So by the way, one of the biggest mistakes I find that people make is they don't check the box, seller exclusively or buyer exclusively. They don't check one of the boxes. In other words, they might type in Alon Pinnell as the listing agent, but they don't check the box represents the seller exclusively They type in KW Silicon City, but they don't check the box represents the buyer exclusively. California Civil Code says if you mess up agency confirmation, they can cancel the contract. You understand? This isn't a minor thing. If you mess up confirmation of agency, they can just cancel the contract. Either party can cancel the contract. You don't want to mess this up, right? And so many people, I read offers all the time for agents, and I'm quick at finding mistakes because I've done this long enough and I know where they are. This is the first one, right? First of all, I look to see if they have close of escrow. Second, I look to see if they checked confirmation of agency and if they've checked the right box. Sometimes they don't check the right box. So let's look at finance terms, initial deposit. And again, there's a whole bunch of shalls that were highlighted. I don't know. 3% when possible is what it says for the deposit. In the current market we're in, it's generally assumed that you're going to try to have a 3% initial deposit. That's because liquidated damages says that if the buyer breaches the contract, the seller can keep 3%. In the old days, and we might get back to that, we used to make a 1% initial deposit and raise it by 2% once contingencies have been removed. Nowadays, it's customary to put down 3%. If you don't, your offer will not be considered as likely to be accepted. It's not considered to be as good of an offer. I'm going to let it do this while I'm talking. I don't think it'll care. Yes, go ahead. It'll let me highlight stuff. What else do we have here? Then it says notice I put in stock sale, IRA loan, liquidation, be sure of time frame. So it's not just do they have the 3% and do they have the down payment. There may be a question of where is it and how fast can they get their hands on it. And then over on the left, written in says LA, and that of course stands for Los Angeles. Oops, and now it's cramping up. There we go. Los Angeles, what else could that stand for? Listing, oh yeah, I didn't think of that. I guess it could be listing agent. So the listing agent can give, if you're a fussy listing agent, you might go ahead and give what's called a 2-day notice to perform before the 3 days is up. What that means is, if I'm the listing agent, I don't even want to change the status from an active to a pending or a contingent status until the money's in escrow. Because sometimes the buyer is making more than one offer on more than one property. And they have no intention of putting the money into escrow on the one they don't want to buy. So if I change the status from active to pending and then they say, well, we've decided not to buy it, there's nothing I can really do, so I let it ride until the money is in escrow. Also, sometimes people don't put the money in escrow at the end of 3 days. Now, if you're the real estate agent and you're holding the deposit, you've done something wrong, because we're not supposed, don't hold the deposit. We would be guilty of commingling if we don't deposit the money within 3 business days, but that law does not apply to the buyer. And is it possible the buyer is not going to put their money in on the 3rd business day? Is that possible? And so and if you don't do it on the 3rd business day and I'm the listing agent, what I'm supposed to do then is give you a notice to perform, right? It's a 2-day notice to perform, but that means you have 2 more days to put the money into escrow. So what I might do is after day 1, I'll give you a 2-day notice to perform. So I'm asking you to perform on the date that you're supposed to put the money into escrow. And if you don't, I'm canceling the contract, right? Otherwise, you get an extra 2 days. Did any of that make sense what I just said?
Yeah, but that's if you hand it to them. If you mail it to them, don't they get an additional thing?
The notice to perform? Well, if he's talking about delivery of the notice to perform, there's a form which I'll get to at some point called DNA. And you're all familiar with the DNA form, isn't that right? You all know what that one is. And that's where they take DNA samples of what the DNA says is called the delivery notice addendum. And what that would say, and by the way, if I were a listing agent, I would probably include that form as one of the forms that I want to be filled out. And it would say that emailing something to the buyer's agent constitutes delivery. That's what it says, DNA, delivery notice addendum. Not very many real estate agents are savvy enough to know that that exists or how to use it. But a good listing agent would say, I want you to sign this form with your offer. And then that says, all I have to do is email you as the buyer's agent the notice to perform. Because the notice to perform says from delivery, and delivery is when you actually get it. And there's actually been cases where the other agent was hiding, right? And then they actually hired a server to sit at the agent's house and catch him coming home to run up and give him the notice to perform, right? So I would include the DNA form. You understand, as you get better at this, you start closing escape hatches, right? And that's a little hatch. So I want 3 days, I want the money into escrow if I'm the listing agent, all right? Just a second. Or we're going to do something else. All right. So what else did I want to say here? Isn't this fun? Are we having fun? You're not having any fun, I know. What else? Shall. I marked a bunch, there's a whole bunch of shalls marked. When it comes down to loans, let's just talk about that. You shouldn't be doing an increased deposit. Is it letting me do the, we'll see, who cares? Notice it says fill in all in volatile interest markets. First of all, if you're not having a loan contingency, it doesn't matter. If you're not having a loan contingency, it doesn't matter that you fill this out. You would fill this out if you have a loan contingency. And if I see this as a listing agent, I would be concerned if it seemed like the amounts are artificially low. So one of the games that buyer's agents used to do is they would take the interest rate and subtract from it, the one that they were eligible for, and subtract from it and put that in to see if the listing agent noticed, because they basically were describing a loan the buyer couldn't get, which would give them an out, right? So what's common in our market, you should have your buyer's loan submitted to underwriting. You should be able to make the offer without a contingency if you want to save the buyer money. But if our interest rates are low, they went down again. You know that they went down again. If they start to go up, they start to go up quickly. And when that happens, we're going to be filling this out a little bit more effectively. A lot more shalls. This is something, I'm not going to, should I click on them all? You're going to see shall. And the reason I spent some time or somebody else did that I stole it from, clicking on all these is that it gives you an opportunity to see all of the directives that are included in the purchase contract. FHA and VA, I'll do another class on that, but notice some of the stuff that's been typed in, it's not in the PRDS contract, but it's a mandatory with the CAR contract. If we select FHA or VA, an amendatory clause pops up, which is another form that needs to be filled out and included with the FHA and VA offer. I'm not going to do that today. I just want to pull that, your attention to it. By the way, is there any law that says you couldn't log into the CAR and look at all the forms? Could you do that? All right. So by the way, notice here it says 3% and it's got in the parentheses where it says balance of down payment or purchase price. If you use the CAR, what it's going to do is it's going to take the purchase price, it's going to subtract the loan amount, and it's going to subtract your initial deposit. And what's ever left over will automatically go in paragraph F. Right? I can see you're all having fun. All right, let's look at page 2. one of the things up here, I'm guessing why the guy who did this highlighted stuff, a lot of times agents don't put the dates on every page. They just don't.
It's not filled in automatically.
It can be, depending on how you fill it in. So for example, if you're an agent and you use the cover sheet and you do the cover sheet, it auto-populates all the fields. But some real estate agents, many real estate agents don't use the cover sheet, they just launch the contract. And if you just launch the contract, it doesn't automatically populate every area where it says date. And so I see a bunch of them, and I can tell when I look at it that they didn't use the cover sheet because some of the pages have dates and some of the pages don't have dates. Right? Now, this not only, if I'm a listing agent, do I want to have a transaction with a sloppy agent? Probably not. Right? So, I don't know. So you should, let's see, should I be doing this? There's another shall. And verification attached, so I overdid that a little bit. Verification attached, you should have a verification that says that they have the money to buy the property. Now, was there a question?
Yeah, so you only put down or deposit the earnest money after the contract has been accepted.
Right, you don't do anything with the money until the contract has been accepted. And then you have 3 days, the buyer has 3 days to put the money into escrow. You don't do anything until, and that's something you ought to explain to people because some people don't realize that. First of all, that's why I don't even want their check, right? I don't want their check. Because I'm regulated as to what I have to do with the check, but they're not. It's not a crime if they choose not to put the check into escrow. It is a crime if I don't, right? So I don't want the check. Verification attached. It's what that means is you either have to get the lender to do this and include it in the loan pre-approval letter. That was always my preference. Otherwise, what I have to do is I have to show copies of the bank statements. Now, I was helping an agent with a transaction. She had the listing, and this is just sort of metaphorical but relevant. I knew the loan agent who wrote the loan approval letter, and I called him and I was chatting with him. I've known him for a really long time. And he pulled up the account of the buyer and he says they have over $1 million in the bank. Now, if you're the listing agent and you got an offer and you saw that they had $1 million in the bank, what would you be thinking about price? Would you be hearing cash registers going off in your head? And might you be thinking, we can count, these people got money. What's another 50 grand to them, right? So if you give people copies of their bank statements and other things, you might be demonstrating an ability to pay a whole lot more money than they want to pay. Isn't that right? But you could have the lender look at it, and if the lender writes the pre-approval letter correctly, the lender can say, I have verified that they have the cash necessary for the down payment and to close. Doesn't say that you have to give people copies of their bank statements. Do you want people to have copies of your bank statements? Even if you block out, then you have to block out their account number. Doesn't that sound like a pain, right? And I always like to avoid any work of any kind. Appraisal contingency. There's another shall. I'm going to go ahead and click on these. Is not contingent. If you're selecting, if you have appraisal as a contingency, it's going to be a weaker offer. If you don't have appraisal as contingency, there's a risk. So the conversation you should have with the buyer is, and what I sometimes do is I show the buyer the market conditions advisory, which is a standard form. Most offices require it. And basically what that form says is not to make an offer the way I'm about to tell you to make an offer. This is what I actually say to people. This form is going to tell you not to do what I'm going to tell you you have to do. And I share, this is a true statement, I've watched lawyers who counsel real estate agents explain the market conditions advisory form, and what they say is you should let your buyers lose a few homes by not getting it so that they self-discover it's not working and they suggest that maybe we ought to write the offers differently. I share that with clients and I ask them, what would you like to do? Would you like to lose a couple of homes first so that you could learn that it won't work? Or would you like me to just tell you that's not going to work? Guess what they always say? Just tell me what's going to work, right? You understand that? But is there so the conversation you have to have with the appraisal is something like, so we're offering $800,000. Last sale of the property was like $775,000. There's a chance that it may only appraise for $775,000. What that means is, if appraisal is not a contingency, it means in addition to your down payment and all your other closing costs, you have to throw in another $25,000. In addition to your down payment and other closing costs, you have to put in another $25,000. What do you think of that? Would you be willing to do it? If they say yes, I would say, what if it appraises for $760,000? Are you willing to put in $35,000 or $40,000? Right? Does everybody see where I'm going? And at some point they might say, no, right? No, I'm not going to put in $50,000. I don't have $50,000. I don't want to put in $50,000. Now, we have two choices. One is they could roll the dice and hope that it does appraise for more than that. That would make the offer look stronger, but they're in big trouble if it doesn't appraise. Or two, we can put a floor on the appraisal. In other words, we can write in a clause that says property must appraise for a minimum of, and you take the maximum amount that they're willing to contribute and subtract that from the amount you're writing the offer for. Does everybody get me? If they said the most we could ever afford to do is $50,000, you take their offer, subtract 50, whatever that number is, property must appraise for a minimum of, write that number in. There's a blank thing coming up. It's coming up, right? I was at another office and an agent was bragging about how good this other agent was from another office because the agent had made a non-contingent offer, no appraisal contingency, and the difference was $50,000. And the buyer freaked out and she talked the buyer into not killing anyone and completing the sale. And I'm listening to this thinking, that's crazy. They should have told the buyer this up front, right? You understand? The worst thing you could do is to check not contingent and not explain to the buyer what that means and what the worst case scenario is, right? And if they don't have the money to make up the difference, you have to put a lid on it, right? Right? Does everybody get that? Price minus what they're willing to throw in, their maximum, whatever that is, that's the minimum for the appraisal. Loan applications, you ought to have a letter attached. If you don't have a letter attached, you're doing it wrong. They're not going to be able to buy the house. Loan contingency, if you've submitted it to underwriting and it's already been approved, it's possible to make no loan contingency. So my conversation with clients would be, if you go to the process of getting the right loan from the right lender and we submit it to underwriting, it's going to save you tens of thousands of dollars when you buy a home. And people sometimes say, well, what do you mean it's going to save me tens of thousands of dollars? How will it do that? So if I'm a seller and I have two offers and they're both for $800,000 and one has a loan contingency, they've got a pre-approval letter, but a loan contingency, the other one has no loan contingency, which one do I take? The one without a loan contingency. How much higher would the one with a loan contingency have to be before I would pick it over the one without a loan contingency? The answer is an awful lot higher. We're not talking about 5,000 or 10,000. 20 may not even do it. 30 may not do it. You understand? You would have to outbid the other offers by a huge amount. You understand that one of the conversations that you need to be comfortable with having with a prospective buyer is if they pick the wrong lender, because they pick the lender by finding somebody on the internet that's quoting a rate that's 1/8% less than what our lender might charge, thinking, look at all the money I'm going to save. They're going to lose all of it when it comes to writing the offer. They'll lose it all and more, because if I'm the loan agent, when I got that loan letter from a guy I knew from Bank of America that I could call and talk to, and he said, these guys are solid, you know me, this will close. Which offer are we going to take? The one, and if it was an internet company that I can't call and talk to, they don't get it, or they have to offer a lot more. Right? You understand? You need to be able to convince buyers that by going with the cheapest loan, it may cost them more to buy the house. Right? Does everybody see that? Right? Loan cost, was that enough about that? So notice it's written in here, appraisal contingency must be removed separately. Beware of review appraisals. So what that means is there's a couple things here. First of all, just because there's no loan contingency, just because it's gone to underwriting, and just because the buyer has cash does not necessarily mean that the lender doesn't care about the appraisal. Just because the buyer has the cash to make up the difference doesn't necessarily mean the lender does not care about the appraisal. And so one of the things you have to ask the loan agent, to ask the underwriter, is if it doesn't appraise, but the buyer has cash, is that okay? And there are some where they're going to say it's not okay if it's too far off. It's just not okay. Right? And if you've got appraisals, can review appraisals mean that sometimes the first appraisal isn't the only appraisal. Right? Sometimes you get an appraisal and it's right on the number, and then you hear it's being reviewed. Right? It's being reviewed. And then they have another appraisal and it might be lower. Buyer limits on, lender limits on buyer credits. So there's another shall there, which is that underlined, by the way, is not a, shall be disclosed to buyer's lender. Now, what this is saying is that who was I talking to today? I can't even remember anymore. But they wanted a $25,000, the buyer wanted a $25,000 credit towards closing costs because of repair issues. First of all, you never say to the lender repair issues. Right? You understand? You never say, we want credit because the roof is bad. You never say that. Because what that's saying to the lender is the value of the property is not as high as you're asking them to make a loan. So, by the way, this is why you should show it to me before you send the offer to somebody. You should kind of show it to me. But what you want to do is say, seller to credit buyer $25,000 towards closing costs. That's it. Then the agent said, well, there aren't $25,000 in closing costs. Well, who gets the money? Who gets the money if there aren't $25,000 in closing costs? Who gets the money? And that's highlighting a whole bunch of stuff, but you get the idea. Seller gets to keep the change. So what this paragraph says is that if we say the seller is going to give the buyer $25,000 credit towards closing costs, and closing costs are only $15,000, the buyer does not get the other $10,000. They don't get a red envelope at the closing table with cash in it. Right? That was the question I was being asked. Do they get cash? No. Are they going to get a check? No. What about the other $10,000? It's gone. Does everybody understand that?
Doesn't come off.
No. It says, If the total credit allowed by buyer's lender, and by the way, the lender may have rules as to how much they're going to let you credit, is less than the contractual credit, then the contractual credit shall be reduced to the lender's allowable credit, and in the absence of a separate written agreement between the parties, there shall be no automatic adjustments to the purchase price to make up for the difference between the contractual credit and the lender's allowable credit. And there was a whole bunch of shalls in this one. Well, I have the loan, Robin. All right, I know that. Does everybody understand that paragraph? So should you talk to the lender before you write in a clause about credit towards closing costs? All right. Buyer stated financing, paragraph K, is one of my favorite. Reading between the lines, what it essentially says is that the buyer is supposed to try to get the loan that the buyer said they were going to get on the first page of the contract. However, what it sort of says is that if the buyer closes, it's all good. Now, what it says is sellers relying on buyer's representation of the type of financing specified, including, but not limited to, cash, amount of down payment, contingent, non-contingent loan. Sellers agree to a specific closing date purchase price to sell the buyer alliance the buyer's covenant concerning financing. Buyer shall pursue financing specified in this agreement. That's what it says. Seller has no obligation to cooperate with buyer's efforts to obtain any financing other than that specified in the agreement, and the availability of such alternative financing does not excuse buyer from the obligation to pursue the purchase of the property and close escrow specified in this agreement. And I've had people say, I don't see where it says what you said it says. But what this actually sort of says, if we close, it's all good. I'll give you a for instance. If I make an offer that's all cash, does that look good? Mm-hmm. Looks good, doesn't it? But, and let's say the buyer can prove they have the cash. Like that other example, the buyer actually had the cash, but the buyer doesn't want to use the cash. So could the buyer make an all cash offer and then go get a loan to close escrow? As long as it closes and the seller doesn't have to do anything special, the answer is yes. Is a 80% down loan, an 80% loan, 20% down loan better than a 10% down or a 5%? Now, if they have the 20% and can show the cash, could we write up the offer saying 80% is the loan amount, 20% is the down payment? Could they actually get a 90% loan if they closed on time? The answer is yes. Right? The answer is yes. When will, people ask me, agents ask me this, won't they know that we're not really getting an 80% loan? And the answer is nobody other than we will know until loan docs are signed, and then the escrow company will know. They don't really care, and that's 2 days before escrow closes, and usually the seller won't know until it closes. Then the seller really doesn't care as long as it closes. Does the seller really care? Not if it closes. But you understand the negotiation here. You might want to write the offer as the strongest one the buyer could get, even though that's not the one they plan on using. Right? Is that my big cash buyer always said cash, and I knew he was getting a loan against property already owned. Always. He never put his cash in escrow, but he showed that he had it. That's why he has it. He doesn't ever use it. Right?
But if you do that and they aren't able to obtain their 90%,
then they have to put the money into escrow.
Or they're in breach.
Well, or they're in breach and they could lose their deposit. And by the way, there's a loan called recouping. Right? Vera can give us a report on this. Right? So Wells Fargo and some other lenders will, if you buy with all cash, they'll give you your money back afterwards. Right? What, with a limit, there are limits, right? But I said some, so in other words, if you paid all cash, it's possible right after it closes for you to go talk to a bank and get the money back. just like you would have gotten a loan to buy it, you get the loan after you bought it. That's called a recoup.
It's like a refinance.
It's like a refinance, but there's no finance to read.
It's a HELOC?
You understand? It's sort of like that. It's treated a little bit differently. It's not an equity line of credit, so it's not a HELOC. And it's not a refinance because there was no loan to begin with. It's called recouping. All right, but does everybody understand that? That's an important thing. And if they can't prove they have any more money, then you have to put down what they're actually getting. Why not? So you probably shouldn't be marking a lot of these other things here. Other could be FHA or VA if there's the amendatory clause. Buyer and seller's advisory. The inspection advisory is already checked. We're not going to ignore the thing about PRDS, seller supplemental. We're not going to do that. Other terms, beware additional terms should not change other terms or conditions. Word carefully, or you may create unless agreed in writing where you don't want one. And basically what the lawyers will say is that if you're going to write an addendum, you should use precisely the words that the contract uses. And I've gone through some of these courses where does the word shall and the word will mean exactly the same thing? Buyer will versus buyer shall. Now you notice it keeps saying shall, 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 shall. And so if you were going to write an addendum, you ought to write it so it sounds like the contract. I was always really lazy, time efficient. And so what I would simply do is refer to the clause in the paragraph and just say what was being changed. But typing your own, I call it poetry, into these areas could cause more trouble, right? So the question of where would we put in whatever it was we were talking about, I forget what we were talking about, but that's a place where you could write in other poetry. If other terms and conditions do not fit, use an addendum.
So Randy said that's where you would put the appraisal.
Oh, the one about the property must appraise for a minimum of, I would write that in there. You also could write in selling agent is related to buyer, right? Those are probably that's probably the most common thing I see written in there. If there's a lot more stuff you want to put in, you need to just use a separate addendum. Yeah.
Do we have to disclose that we're related?
Yes, it's a business and professions code says you have to disclose if you have a relationship of a significant relationship with the client.
There's a form.
No, you just write it in usually. Allocation of costs. So it says seller shall pay. If it's in the disclosure package, you can actually name it. My default setting is if it's in the disclosure package, I just leave it blank. So the natural hazard disclosure, if the seller hasn't given you one, if it's not part of the listing package, then you want to mark seller shall pay for one. And by the way, I would like to see an environmental personally. If I'm the listing agent, I would tell my client to not only order an NHD. By the way, I usually didn't tell them. I just got their permission to order the NHD, and I would order the environmental too. Does anybody know how much the environmental costs over a normal NHD? That's right, about $20. That's about it. Sometimes 25. 20 bucks. And if you don't do it, and the buyer gets one and finds an environmental hazard, they can back out of the contract. Right? And I was trying to remember escape hatches. To close them, that's an escape hatch. And for $20, why not close that out?
Sorry, just to be clear.
Sure.
So then you would check the second box?
I usually, if it was already there, I would leave it blank.
I'm talking about the first one's for tax and the second one's for
Environmental. So right here, there's a little box to check for environmental. And if they didn't have it,
Are you sure it's not the second one?
no, this is right here is environmental. This is a box. It doesn't show up because I'm using a scan, but right there, right where that cursor is the box you would check. Right there, right before the E.
Why does it say including, oh, you mean it's including tax, that's from the previous sentence.
Right, tax is already in it. So the natural hazard disclosure has many parts. And we have a person who comes in every once in a while and talks about natural hazard disclosures. The core elements of an NHD is one, natural hazard disclosures, which of course you would sort of guess from the name. But number two is tax. And that would be things like tax assessments, special assessments, bond assessments, and things like that. Every NHD company throws that in. Right? Everyone does. Environmental is an option. Other, I'm not even sure what that is. Right? But there may be other things that you could get. I don't know. I've never filled in another. But environmental isn't automatic. And some agents don't order it because they want to save $20, but it's leaving an opening. Right? Because you understand, if, let's say we make an offer with, just make me clear on this. Let's say we make an offer with no contingencies, right? No contingencies. And I order an environmental report and it shows that there's an environmental hazard in the area, my buyer can still back out. All right, we can still back out because this is a new disclosure and it wasn't included in the original. All right, it's an escape hatch. Other reports, if you're filling in other things here, you're doing it wrong. And you should call me. Right, do you understand? If you're writing in a bunch of other reports, something is probably wrong. The only time I normally would do this is if we're talking about a septic tank, right? And if you've got clients that are buying a property with a septic tank, you got to talk to me before you write it up, right? Because there's a percolation test and there's other inspections that you would get related to a septic tank. Right, you understand? And of course, if the listing agent knows what they're doing, they already have one. Right. But otherwise, don't write stuff in. Government retrofit, seller shall pay. I generally would check the seller shall pay for smoke alarms, carbon monoxide, water heater bracing if required by law. And then notice it says caution if FHA or VA. What that means is that Veterans Administration and FHA generally have something called health and safety clauses, and so they oftentimes require things, right? They just do. And whether or not the seller is required to do something, FHA and VA may require them to do things. Notice it talks about cost of compliance with any minimum mandatory government inspections, check city requirements. Does anybody know of a city that has minimum mandatory requirements for selling a home? Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz has an ordinance that says if you sell your home, you have to have special low flow shower heads for water conservation and low flow toilet settings. That's a requirement. It's mandatory in Santa Cruz County, right? So could you easily find these things by going to Google and asking, right? So there's not a lot here. There are some counties that have, especially when you wander out of the area, one of the reasons I didn't like to sell homes outside of the area was besides being lazy and not wanting to drive out of the area, is that they might have other regulations that I don't know about. I had a guy that wanted me to list his property in Tahoe, and I frankly just said, no, I'm not going to do it. I'll get somebody I know in Tahoe to do it, but I don't want to do it because I know Tahoe has a whole bunch of these things. I don't want to learn, right? You know, I have to admit I did list a house on the Quail Ridge Golf Course in Carmel. I made an exception. Right. I made an exception, but you understand. You should know which city. Some cities have minimum standards for insulation, right? And so they want you to have your insulation checked, and if it's not up to, there's not, and you get the idea. Escrow and title, find out what is common practice in county where the property is located. How many of you know my favorite site for doing this? It's called Chicago, CHICAGO Title Transfer Tax. Now I'm just Google searching Chicago Title Transfer Tax, and the first thing that comes up is a website, and agents come in and they show me their contracts, and it gets to county and city taxes and who pays what. There's some I know, but I don't. Today I was talking to someone about Fremont. I don't know if Fremont has a city transfer tax, but Chicago Title Transfer Tax does. Now I know that a lot of the title companies have little sheets that says who pays what. I can pull this up on my cell phone if I need to, right? You understand? And then what you do is you scroll down, and so let's just look at Santa Clara County for fun. You look at Santa Clara County. Did I go past Santa Clara County? Santa Clara County. So it shows, first of all, the city transfer tax. The county transfer tax is $1.10 per thousand. Seller pays everywhere. Seller pays. I've had people say, well, it's in Alameda County or it's in San Mateo County. That's a buyer pay county, not for the transfer tax. That's for escrow and title, but not for the transfer tax. You know how it's annoying if I'm the listing agent and you write up an offer asking for the seller to pay for half of a city transfer tax that does not exist, right? You understand? You say, we're supposed to split it 50-50, and I'm thinking, do I counter this out? Do I just ignore it, right? But I'm not thinking, ooh, this is a smart agent. I'm thinking you're not paying attention, nor are you willing to do even a little bit of research, right? And then it shows which cities in Santa Clara County have city taxes. And normally it's split 50-50, right? Escrow fees are, that's a different one. But normally here we are, the city transfer tax, buyer seller split 50-50. So you see that Mountain View, Palo Alto, and San Jose. By the way, that comes out to $1.65 per thousand. Somebody will ask, what is the city transfer tax likely to be? Because the contract doesn't say, it just says split 50-50, and I've had people say, so what is it?
Yeah.
And you say, I don't know. All I know is that you have to pay half of it. Does that look good?
No.
No, it doesn't look good. So it's $1.10 per thousand if you're representing the seller. If it's an $800,000 house, you take 800 times $1.10. It's $1.65 per thousand if you're splitting the city transfer tax. You take 800 times $1.65. That's the tax. Right? Not hard if you know it's $1.65 when you split it 50-50.
Does that mean that only Mountain View, Palo Alto, and San Jose?
That means only Mountain View, Palo Alto, and San Jose. In Santa Clara County have a city transfer tax. It means Campbell does not. It means Saratoga does not. And Cupertino does not. And Los Gatos does not. Now, if I have a Campbell listing or a Morgan Hill listing, and you say we want to split the transfer tax, I'm like, oh. All right. All right. So buyer's choice, win the war, not the buy. So, by the way, what you ought to do if you want your offer accepted is to say who pays for what that's customary in that county. So Santa Clara County is a seller pay county. Alameda and San Mateo is a buyer pay county. Now, sometimes it's logical to think that if the buyer pays, the buyer gets to pick. But if I'm the listing agent and I've listed a house in San Mateo County, do you understand there's this relationship that listing agents have with their title company? Sometimes it's not healthy, but they have relationships with the title company, and they want their title company to be the escrow holder. And if you're writing, let's say this is in San Mateo County, and you're taking the idea, since the buyer pays, the buyer picks. And I have a friend who's a title rep too, so I want that company to be the title company. You're going to lose the war even if you win the battle. What I'm just saying is that's going to kick off the listing agent, right? And so if you want your offer accepted, don't mess with who they pick for escrow and title. Now, sometimes people that have gone through a real estate school recently will have read that RESPA says that it's illegal for the seller to require that the buyer use a particular title company. The word require is important. I wouldn't argue with the listing agent about the title company. Their policies are almost identical. I mean identical, and they charge almost exactly the same fee, right? Deserving, but you're going to, what I would do if I knew the escrow company is I would put it in here. If I don't know the escrow company, I type in seller's choice. And this one says buyer's choice, which is, it depends upon the county. I wouldn't force it. Right, you understand? I usually would just type in seller's choice. I'm using somebody else's form because I was like efficient this morning. All right, does everybody understand? Whatever, if they've already opened escrow, wrestling the escrow away from them is probably not the good way to start this transaction.
Does it help at all for a buyer to offer to pay the escrow fee in Santa Clara County?
No, does it hurt? No, it's just asking, it's just throwing in more money. You might as well, that confuses agents. I would just add it onto the price. You don't want to confuse them. All right, and so I also would put in seller's choice if I were doing it. Seller pays in most counties, negotiable, that's true, but everything is negotiable. Is it possible to write an offer asking the seller to pay for everything? And the answer, sure, right? There's no law, this is what's customary. Is it possible to write the offer and have the buyer pay for everything? Sure, but most real estate agents are not that creative. They want it done the way it says that it's supposed to be done on the little handouts the title company gives you. Number 4, seller shall pay HOA fees. That's paragraph 4. And I believe, as I look through this, where are we? Paragraph 4. Notice that just says seller shall pay HOA fees. It just says that. Seller shall pay for fees for, these are the ones required to be delivered by the Civil Code 4525. All right, which of course you've all pretty much memorized, I realize, Civil Code 4525. And that Civil Code requires CC&Rs, financial statements, and the CC&Rs and the financial statements, and 2 years of the newsletters for the meeting minutes of the homeowners association. There are other fees, so usually seller pays for the HOA fees. Usually the seller pays for the HOA fees. Usually the seller pays for the other HOA fees. So if you're understanding what this is saying, is that the ones that are statutorily required, the default setting is the seller has to pay for it. That's because the California Civil Code says the seller has to do this. But then there are sometimes additional HOA documents, and it's negotiable as to who pays for it. My experience has been usually they throw all of it into one big pile, right? And so if you pay for it, you get them all. So I would usually put down the seller pays. Private transfer fee doesn't come up very often. I hope you don't find one. There are occasionally so there's a subdivision in Northern California that was having trouble with an environmental group. It'll come to me in a moment. And so what they negotiated was if this environmental group were to leave them alone and stop picketing and stop harassing them, that they would pay the environmental group a certain amount every time a property was sold. So in the CC&Rs, it says every time a property is sold that a certain fee will be paid to this environmental group. That's a private transfer fee. Now, that's not a common thing. but there's at least one that I know of in Santa Clara County. And normally we would either leave it blank or click on seller shall pay. And you usually can find this in a prelim, right? It would usually be in a prelim, and it would be good to read should you read the prelim before you have the buyer sign off on the prelim. Should you read the homeowner association documents before you have the buyer sign off on the HOA? Well, how about this? If we give the buyer the homeowner association documents? Because a good agent already has these, and the buyer is given a little bit of time, is that okay then to just go ahead and remove that contingency? Is it? So I had a transaction, I'm selling a condominium in Kingman, and buyer moves in, and 2 weeks later, the buyer gets a notice for an $8,000 assessment. 2 weeks after escrow closed. The buyer was unhappy. The buyer called the buyer's agent. The buyer's agent called me, and I listened to him for a while. By the way, people that, I don't even think Brandy has seen me do this, where I put the phone down while they're talking and I continue to do stuff on my computer. I wait until they run out of steam. And basically he was saying that we knew and we didn't disclose, and and all that stuff. And I said, after he stopped, that we did disclose, because included in the homeowner association package was the last 2 years of the meeting minutes of the homeowner association. And I told the guy, I'll make a side bet of $1,000 with you that it's mentioned in the homeowner association meeting minutes. Do you think that they've been discussing this increased assessment? They have to, right? And there's probably fist fights and other things that occurred. And I said, the reality is we gave you the documents and you didn't read them. You didn't read them. That's the problem. You threw them in a drawer. You didn't even print them out. And now your client is mad, and guess who screwed up? Right? You did. So who do you think the buyer was after for the money? The agent, the buyer's agent.
I have a question. So what if my client doesn't speak English that much? Am I responsible to translate all of that CC?
No, that doesn't say you're responsible to translate all the CCNRs, but what I would do is I oftentimes would print them out, and I would read through them, and I'd take a yellow highlighter, and when I saw stuff that was bad, I would highlight it, and off to the side, I'd even make a little mark for their initials, and when I got to it, I would point to this, and I would say, look at this, right? I had a townhouse I sold up in Almaden, and I'm reading the meeting minutes, and it's talking about pigs. Wild pigs running around the townhouse complex. And I read the next month, and they're still talking about wild pigs, and the next month they formed a wild pig committee in the homeowner association, and I keep reading, and now I'm interested, right? And I read on, and they hired a wild pig trapper. This, by the way, was a revelation. I did not realize that was even a career path. Right, I didn't even know that of all the things I could have chosen to do, being a pig trapper was one of the things. And so the guy trapped wild pigs. This is in Almaden, right? And caught more than 13, 14 wild pigs one weekend.
Wow.
One weekend. Do you understand? We're not talking about a pig here and a pig there. There was a pig everywhere. So I'm going through, so I highlight this, and I'm showing it to my client who was a buyer, and I promised to buy her teenage son a crossbow. There's a joke there. And so she decided she did this, and I would highlight it, and I would have them initial off to the side, things that were bad.
And then you keep that copy?
I keep that copy. I make them a copy too, but I keep that copy. So later they can't say, you never mentioned that there were wild pigs running around. Is it dangerous for you? Now, does that mean you have to read all 500 pages of the CCNRs? No. You're going to find that the juicy stuff, the bylaws are going to say you can't do anything without their permission. And the homeowner association meeting minutes and newsletter is where a lot of the good stuff is. Right? You understand? And at the very minimum, you ought to read that. Right? And point it out to people.
So where do we find those, like the minutes and stuff?
It's part of the package. The minutes is a required part of the civil code. They have to give it to you. I would go through and find them and read the meeting minutes. All right, so that enough. Home warranty, provide or waive. Those are your two choices. That's way too much. And by the way, if you're paying for it or the buyer's paying for it, you don't need to really say not to exceed or do anything. This not to exceed is really something you only need to do if, in fact, you're asking the seller to pay for it. I'm just saying, you understand? And you don't have to worry about pool, spa, air conditioning. And buyer waives the purchase of the home warranty, but it doesn't say they couldn't get one. Anyhow, we don't need to worry about that. How am I doing on this? 15 more minutes and then we'll be done with it. That's all we can do today. Items included and excluded from sale. Items included in the sale, all existing fixtures and fittings. Existing electrical, mechanical, lighting, plumbing, heating, ceiling fans, fireplace inserts, gas logs, grates, solar power systems, built-in appliances, windows and door screens, awning shutters, window coverings, attached floor coverings. So I sold the townhouse in Willow Glen, and the owner of the townhouse had a very nice looking candle abra, a candle holder made out of driftwood. It stood about this high. It had little things sticking out with candles all over it. And it was hooked to the wall so it wouldn't fall over with the lit candles and burn the place down. Included or not in the sale based upon this contract? Included or not?
It's attached.
It's attached.
Yeah, I suppose, yes,
But not
it's already.
What?
But it's not a fixture.
It's not a fixture, but it's attached.
Depends on the intent.
Depends on the intent. So it was gone when the buyer moved in. The agent called me unhappy and said, "What, where is it?" It was attached to the wall. And I said, "It's a decoration. It's a decoration. It's a decoration." I said, if it had been an original Monet that they had bolted to the wall so it wouldn't have fallen off, would you have expected to get that? And the agent said, "I guess so." And I'm like, so then he called me back and he said, "Lighting fixture." The candles, he wanted to argue that it was a lighting fixture, and I said, "Give it up. It's not a lighting fixture, right? It's a decoration." Now, but you understand, could some decorations have to be attached to the wall? Does that mean that they go with the property? No, decorations don't go with the property. Could this be, guess who may have purchased a candle thing for a buyer? Right? Do you understand? I believe if you stood outside of Home Depot and looked for people walking out carrying fireplace screens, fireplace inserts, those little sweeper things that go with the fireplace screen and insert, chandeliers, and you stop them and ask what they did for a living, you'd find real estate agent comes up higher than our percentage of the population. Do you know why? Because the buyer moved in and the stuff was gone. And the buyer wanted it. I actually had a guy say to me once, "The screen is missing. I only bought this house because of the screen." And I'm like, "Really?" That's the only reason he bought the house. How about in the backyard, in the lawn area, is a cement bench for people to sit on? Included or not? Look at the existing mechanical, electrical, lighting, plumbing, heating, ceiling fans, fireplace inserts, gas logs, and grates. So do you understand a fireplace insert is not the same thing as the screen? Right? An insert is not the same thing as the screen. Yeah, and it doesn't include the little brush and shovel. It's not the insert. And great solar power system, built-in appliances, window and door screens, awning shutters, window coverings, attached floor coverings, television, attached satellite dishes, air coolers, conditioners, pool, spa equipment, garage door openers, remote controls, mailbox, in-ground landscaping, trees, shrub, water features, fountains, water softeners, water purifiers, security alarm systems. Does it say anything about a bench in the backyard? That's why people buy, and they went, and guess what? That concrete bench, which looked like it wasn't designed to ever move, was gone. And guess who really wanted the bench? The buyer. I ended up buying them a bench for the backyard.
So that comes from the agent.
It's called a closing gift. How would you like not to do this? So what that means is, should you point at stuff and say, what about that? Anything, is this a list you should actually know? By the way, it says here that it doesn't matter what the MLS says. It doesn't matter what the MLS says. Doesn't matter what the MLS says. Doesn't matter what the MLS says. This overrides anything else. Doesn't matter what the MLS says. I've had agents attach a copy of the MLS printout, like it does something to staple it or put it on the pile, like that has some legal significance, I'm not sure, right? But it says in plain language, it doesn't, what the MLS says doesn't count. It says items listed as included or excluded in the MLS flyers or marketing materials are not included in the purchase price or excluded from sale unless specified, right? Nobody cares what the flyer says or the MLS says. It's what you write here. So this list, I would know, and if it's not on the list, how about, have you ever seen in backyards great, like palm trees, but they're in like big concrete vases, right? Big. I've seen those disappear when the escrow closed, right? And I'm thinking they had to have a forklift to move them. In-ground, what does it say here about landscaping? In-ground landscaping is a great big huge plant sitting in a big concrete container in the backyard, in-ground landscaping.
Exactly a common.
Right?
Trees and shrubs are separate from in-ground landscape.
Yes, but that would be, they're going to argue it's a plant. Right?
So do we need to state it out if we need more room?
Yes, you should. You could write things in here, or you can actually include another list.
But would that make the seller upset?
Yes, it can.
Oh, okay.
But it all depends. You just want, how about this? It's not whether they get it or not, it's whether they understand that they're getting it or not. Does everybody understand what I'm saying? It's when they think they're getting it and then they show up and it's not there that they get all huffy.
Managing your expectations.
Right. And so you should find out what's really included based upon a conversation with the listing agent. And the listing agent may not know that they want to take the thing with them.
So before we write the offer, we check with the listing agent if we can check off these things?
I'll tell you what I do.
Okay.
I would walk around and I point to things. I say, you have to realize you may not get that. You see that? You may not get that.
Yeah.
See that one? Don't even think that you're getting that. Because you're definitely not going to get that. Right? You understand?
Yeah.
And then if they get it,
It's better. Yeah.
it's a bonus.
Yeah.
Right? But if it's not on this list, I would point to it and say, you need to know you probably won't get that.
Conversely, sometimes the seller doesn't want to.
So that's true, but it's when my client was taking that candle thing no matter what, there was just no way.
But in terms of having a conversation up front, if
That's
if the agents get together and say, you know what, the buyer's really dying for that.
Yes, but when they're getting ready to make the offer, at that point, I don't know the answer to all those questions. And I would go, because I've learned the hard way, by buying stuff, that to go around and point at things and say, that may not be included, that may not be included, that may not be included, that may not be included. And if they say, well, we want all that stuff, we can put that in the offer, but you understand we're in a competitive offer environment, perhaps. By the way, when the market changes, you can ask for more stuff, right? But right now, it's not a good time. What else? Leased or liened items. You could read this: integrated phone, home automations, including components such as intranet and intranet connected devices, control units, other than non-dedicated mobile devices, electronics, and computers, applicable software permissions, passwords, codes, and access information. Security, I've had people move out and they don't tell anyone what their code is to the security system. Right? You basically have to rip the thing out or have the company come out and reset it. There isn't a lot you could do, but one of the things in a walkthrough, could you look to see if they provided all those codes and things. Leased or liened items. I may or may not have spoken here about this, but I'm going to now just in case I never have. Is it a good thing to see that they have solar panels? Good thing, right? So let's say the solar panels are not paid for, but are leased or financed. Now, the problem is, some people find this hard to grasp, but the credit score required to buy a house is lower than the credit score required to lease solar panels. You understand what I'm saying? The mere fact that you can qualify for a $975,000 house does not mean that they're going to let you assume a loan on a $9,750 solar panel system. And you know why? Because solar panels are depreciating each year at a rather precipitous rate. You understand, every year solar panels get better and cheaper, and so what happens is some people just walk over, they say, forget it. What are you going to do, come and take them away? Go ahead. I don't want them anyhow. I'm not going to pay you anymore. Is that what the solar panel company wants? They have to come back and rip the solar panels off of the house and take them away? No. They want you to pay for the solar panels at that price over the time. But you understand, when the buyer figures out that they could buy new solar panels that work better for less than the remaining amount of the lease or the lien, they might choose to do that. So there are actually cases where the buyer cannot qualify for the lease of the solar panels, but they qualify to buy the house. Isn't that nice? All right. And by the way, it says, seller shall within the time specified in 14A disclose to buyer of any item or specific in 8B or otherwise include the sales leased but not owned by seller or specifically subject to a lien or other encumbrance delivered to buyer all written materials. Buyer's ability to assume any such lease or willingness to accept the property subject to any such lien or encumbrance is a contingency in favor of the buyer. So if you put down no contingencies, but you don't have a copy of the leased or liened items, well, but not if you put down, not if you said in contingency removal, we're removing all contingencies. Let me say it plainly, if I haven't yet. If there are any leased or liened items, you do not remove that contingency until the buyer can qualify. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So is this part of the disclosure?
It's supposed to be. It says, seller shall with the time specified in 14A. What is the time specified in 14A? That's right. 7 days. 7 days is what it says in 14A. Turn over. And then it says that you have, it's a contingency, it's specified in 14B and C. So is there a problem making it, you need to know whether or not, if there are solar panels, that's a red flag. Right? Do you ever understand, if there are solar panels, that's a red flag? And you need to find out if they're owned or not. If they're owned, it's all cool. If they're not, that's a contingency. Right? And you don't want to remove that contingency. Not right away. So there's also something called a PACE loan or a HERO loan. I don't know if you've heard of those. A PACE loan, and by the way, this is a fascinating subject. It really is. I'm going to type in PROBLEM, problems with PACE loans. PACE loans can throw a wrench in home sales. PACE financing, problems with PACE. PACE loans can interfere with home sales. Solar financing, PACE is back, but feds are wary. Green financing has hobbled home sales in California. That seems like an interesting title to an article. And what a PACE loan is, it's a government financing in order to install energy efficiency, specifically solar, right? And a PACE loan is what's called a super lien, and it has super priority. What that means is that it comes before any other lien, other than taxes. What that means is most lenders will not make a loan if there's a PACE loan on the property, which means the PACE loan has to be paid off. What I'm saying is that it can't be paid off by buyer's funds through escrow. The seller must pay off the loan before escrow closes. That means the seller has to have the money to pay off that loan, or no bank is going to touch the property for the buyer. More than 50,000 California households have signed up for property assessed clean energy financing since they passed the law in 2008. Because the improvement sale of the home and subsequent owners will reap the benefits, the assessments are intended to remain with the property in the event of a sale. But some homeowners trying to sell their homes have found potential buyers scared off by the higher tax assessments, and now realtors in the state are organizing against PACE. So I go to sometimes the Morgan Hillbilly meeting for the realtors, and we've had people come and speak about how the difficulty of selling a house that has a PACE loan on it, and why a lot of lenders will not make loans if there is a PACE loan. Isn't that interesting? See, one of the, I've been doing classes in Palo Alto about the purchase, not the purchase contract, the website and things like that, and I'm basically doing it because they want me to, right? I'm a sucker for that. And one of the things that we're going to be talking about, and I'm going to be doing it here, I did it here first, just don't give me that look, before I went to Palo Alto. I did the class here first, but blogging. A lot of people roll their eyes, blogging, I don't want to blog, but would there be a value for this whole idea, right, which you may not have really thought a lot about before now, about leased and liened and solar panels and solar energy and solar financing? Should you read up on that?
Yeah.
Right? By the way, at another office that I work with, we actually had a panel of people from different solar companies come in. I should put that on the list of people to come in and talk. A panel of solar companies that explain what how it works and all that sort of stuff. And one of the values of having a blog is it gives you a place to read about it and then put the information in a place so that you have to. All right, I'm going to stop now because I have another appointment. We're going to start at the bottom of that page, and
When?
next
Tuesday?
next Tuesday, next week I'm out of town. I'm going to San Antonio for 1 week. So I might be back. I have to look to see if I'll be back by Thursday or not. I'm not 100% sure. I'm not 100% sure.
I'm going to be
My-
out on vacation, but I like to, get a